Hello, everyone. As some of you may know, I've been spending a lot of time with the Shem MiShmuel, which was the primary work of Rabbi Shmuel Bornstein, who was a Hasidic Rebbe from Poland. He was the second Sochochover Rebbe, and this was written in the early 20th century. And before we launch into the reading, I just want to give a little background that he's been discussing different kinds of joy, right? And sort of different kinds of emotional engagement. And specifically, he associates this idea of oneg, or a specific kind of joy, with Shabbat. And that's the kind of joy that's associated with equanimity and mental clarity. And then he also talks about simcha as being associated with yantif, with holidays. And he talks about that as a kind of joy that's about excitement, levity, and also physicality. So he's been talking about these different kinds of joys and sort of what their meaning is or how they're manifests, not only in our minds, but also in our bodies. And so I'd like to take a look at that text, Adi, if you don't mind bringing it up. Great. All right. So this is actually from his commentary on Truma. And he says, thus, even though it is good to serve Hashem with passion and physicality, as we have discussed elsewhere, it should come from a place of equanimity. So he's sort of bringing together these two different ideas about joy and about emotional engagement, right? And by the way, that equanimity, what I'm translating it as equanimity there is Yeshuv Hada'at, which is commonly understood to mean equanimity. And that is an aspect of Shabbat, as Shabbat is the locus of mental clarity, da'at. As it is written, to know that I, your Lord, have made you holy. In other words, lada'at, to know, right? Lada'at is one of the words for knowledge, or da'at is one of the words for knowledge. But specifically here, he's talking about it as a kind of mental clarity or focus or equanimity, right? But without equanimity in one's rejoicing, what results? So what happens if we just have sort of this enthusiasm, this excitement, without it having some grounding in equanimity? And he says, even though one imagines in their soul that such passion and devotion is the way of Hashem, it's nothing but fantasy. I found this last bit a bit harsh. So I'm hoping that you don't find it too harsh. But I do think he's onto something. And that is to say that oftentimes we can get caught up in our desire to sort of strive for holiness. And we've certainly seen lots of places and times in our history and in the history of the world where people have gotten caught up in their desire for holiness, their desire to serve God, but somehow they're caught up in a fantasy. Their own desire leads them perhaps astray. And so he's pointing to this equanimity as the thing that grounds us, right? And allows us to connect in a deeper way with joy, but also to connect with a clarity that helps us be sure of our action and also be less inclined to be wrapped up in fantasy. So I wanted to talk, first of all, a little bit about the language he's using here. Because he used Yeshuv Hada'at, right? So literally, that means sort of settled thought or settled knowledge, right? Again, as I mentioned, it's understood to be equanimity. And I thought that was really interesting because I think When you think about equanimity, part of what it does is it allows you to be settled in this moment. It allows your mind to be present in this moment. Because so often without it, we're either trying to push away something that's in this present moment, or we're trying to cling to something, right? And then the other thing I wanted to talk about is just a little bit about where he's getting this connection with Shabbat, right? So he's connecting it with Shabbat through this, through the verse that you have at the bottom of the screen, where it says, "Speak to the Israelite people and say, nonetheless, you shall keep my Shabbats, for this is a sign between me and you throughout the ages." This is probably something you may recognize this language from the Shabbat Kiddush, the afternoon Kiddush. That you should know that I, the Lord, have consecrated you, or that I've made you holy, right? Now, what's interesting is if you are familiar at all with the trope, this word ladat, first of all, it seems a little bit redundant, right? It could have said, this is a sign between me and you throughout the ages, or between me and um, between me and between your children for the generations, right? That you should know that I have made you holy, right? Okay, but the da'at right there, it could be left out, and you could still have, it should be a sign between me and between your children throughout the generations that I have made you holy. Why is la da'at necessary, right? And then on top of it, when you look at the trope, la da'at has a trope on it that makes it sort of stand alone. It isn't really kind of connected with the parsing of the words before or after. And I think that's the reason that that uh, that Rabbi Bornstein was really drawn to that word, because it seems to be sort of popping out at us, right? Why is it there? And moreover, it's got this fantastic trope on it that sort of makes it stick out. La dot, right? Um, and so I think he looked at it and said, there's something about da'at, right? About this kind of mental clarity that is connected with Shabbat. And I think for anyone who's engaged with Shabbat as a spiritual practice, you may realize that part of the beauty of Shabbat is that it asks us to simply accept things as they are, because if we're engaging with it as a practice, then there's things that we don't do, right, on that day. And even if they arise as something that irritates us or that we'd like to change, we have to sort of accept the way they are, right? So I think he's connecting that practice of Shabbat with this idea of equanimity in a really beautiful way, right? I wanted to spend some time on a meditation today, working with equanimity. So, first of all, I'd like you to come to a comfortable seated position. And if you're in a chair, you'll want to make sure that your feet are flat and grounded on the floor, and that they're supporting your torso through the legs, allowing your head to rise up, your spine erect, but your body also relaxed and at ease, your shoulders dropped. And we can begin by turning to the breath, as that's always an excellent way to begin a meditation, grounding in our breath, grounding in its movement through our body, drawing our attention to our body, and the experience of this present moment. Just allowing our attention to follow the breath. Like waves rising and receding. And once you have allowed your attention to settle in your body, I want you to sweep through your body, noticing any points of unpleasantness. It doesn't have to be something big or overwhelming, but just something like perhaps some tension, maybe in the shoulders or the back. Any kind of discomfort you might feel at this moment. Pick one place and allow your attention to settle on that sensation. Noticing what happens when you give this sensation of unpleasantness just gentle attention. Oh, this is what's here. Notice also if you have any instinctual reactions, perhaps a desire to push away. And just observe that as well. Again, turning your attention gently back to this sensation and seeing what happens if you just explore this sensation as it is, just as a sensation in your body that exists at this moment. allowing the breath to wash through that sensation. Now I'm going to ask you to expand your attention, noticing if there is a point in your body that is a neutral sensation. It may be some point of your body that you don't notice most of the time because it's neutral. Perhaps the back of your hands, perhaps your earlobes. See if you can bring that same quality of attention to neutral sensation. Noticing whatever emerges from that attention. Noticing also the experience of bringing your attention to a neutral place. Is it easier or perhaps more challenging to just allow your attention to rest on this neutral sensation? Again, allowing the breath to wash through this point on your body. Returning the attention to the breath. Now scan through the body for any kind of pleasant sensation. Again, it doesn't have to be big or overwhelming, just something simple. Even perhaps the sensation of light on your cheek, perhaps a sense of ease in your limbs, anything that you might find there. Noticing what arises when you allow your attention to simply rest on this pleasantness. Noticing any challenge that there might be to simply being present to this right now, just for this moment. Also noticing if there's any change that's observable just from the quality of attention. If you wish, you can stay for another moment, giving this gentle attention to whatever part of your body may be calling for it. Or you can return your attention to the movement of the breath in your body, noticing again the way it arises and recedes, wave-like. And at the end of this moment, I will ring a bell.
Thank you, Heather. We're going to conclude in just a moment with Mourner's Kaddish. and then we'll have our question and answer period afterwards. So if you're leaving us now, we wish you farewell and we'll see you again, but please stay with us on the other side of Mourner's Cottage. Feel invited. And if you are saying Kaddish today, for someone holding them in your mind or your heart, please feel welcome to put them in the chat, their name in the chat. And you can feel welcome to unmute yourself and join me in reciting Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah.
Amen.
Be'alma divra chirutei malchutei v'chayechu yomechol chayei kol Beit Yisrael Haggadah Mizman Karim
Amen.
Yehi Shnei Rabba Yitbarach Rabba Yitpa'ar Yitmam Yithadar Yithalev Yithala Shmei B'Kudusha Ve'ela Yikol Gershata V'Shirata Ushbechata V'Nechamata Amiran V'Nechamata Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya Mayim Leinu Ya'asu Oseh Shalom B'Mrama Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu Ya'akol Yisrael V'Akol Yisrael Tevel.
Amen.
Thank you again. I want to give one more plug, by the way, for on June 21st, as you've seen emails, we're honoring all of our teachers, Heather and a cast of thousands of others this year. And so we invite you to join us. It's going to be a really wonderful evening for an hour from 8 to 9 p.m. on June 21st. And so I want to encourage you to sign up for that if you haven't already and to join us. Heather, thank you again for that beautiful teaching and that beautiful set. And I want to invite those who want to share reflections or questions in the chat to do so. I'll get us started. I was really struck by the language of Yishuv Hadat, of which you translated as equanimity, and Da'at we often at IJS think of we translate as awareness, right? And so Yishuv, the resting or returning both to our awareness, right? A restful state of awareness and equanimity, and that relationship with Shabbat, which is really so beautiful. I was thinking of Maimonides, the Rambam in his laws of Shabbat writes the Hilchot Shabbat that you're not supposed to go on a journey. Set out on a journey, within 3 days before Shabbat, because you might not come to be able to observe Shabbat in a state of Yishuv Hadat, in a state of restful awareness. And so I wonder if you just want to say a little bit more about this linkage between Shabbat and that state of equanimity, and how a Shabbat consciousness almost, if Sam Feinsmith, who I know, many people were on his sits last week, and Sam helped us develop the idea of, Shabbat mind, Shabbat awareness. I wonder if how that shows up for you, either as part of your Shabbat practice or your regular everyday practice.
So it's interesting that I feel like I had to go back a little bit, and I'll say I actually grew up not practicing Shabbat, but I grew up, my mother followed a guru. And so it was only when I was in university that I started going to the Hillel and going for services every Shabbat. And the thing that was interesting for me is that I immediately went, oh, this is a mindfulness practice. Because that was what I knew. I knew mindfulness practices. So I said, oh, that's what this is. This is a mindfulness practice. And it's interesting. Recently, I bumped into one of my neighbors who's Jewish. And I said something about something that I was going to have to finish before Shabbat, and he said, "Oh, that's right, because there's all those things you can't, because of all those things you can't do on Shabbat." And it was really interesting for me to hear him use those words, because for me personally, I don't think of it so much as things I can't do. I think of it as things I don't have to do, that I'm sort of given permission to let go of. So whereas the rest of the week, I might feel a responsibility to be involved with all these different kinds of things, on Shabbat, I feel a bit released from that, right? But I do think that there's a kind of equanimity that you cultivate when you practice Shabbat, just because so oftentimes you find yourself in a situation where if it wasn't Shabbat, you would be tweaking. You would be fixing, tweaking, adjusting, changing, looking at the world saying, how would I make it different? How could I make this just a little better, right? Whereas on Shabbat, because of that, because of the prohibitions associated with Shabbat, it's like you had to look at those same things and go, okay, for today at least, it's fine. It's fine just the way it is, at least for today. Maybe tomorrow I'll want to make it different, but today I accept it the way it is. And there's actually really a real power to that, I think. So I don't know if that answers the question. You're muted, Josh. You're so polite. You mute yourself when you're not talking.
Yeah, exactly. Married to a Canadian, you're Canadian, so try to be very polite. Up my politeness game when I'm talking to my Canadian friends. I've taken the language. Oh, my cat has joined us. Here we go. I've taken to using the language of Shabbat as a discipline, right? I mean, and all of this is a discipline, right? It's practice, it's discipline. And I love the way that you're talking, the notion that it gives us permission. You don't have to worry about that today, and I guess that goes to, actually, there's a question here from Georgette. How do you define equanimity? It's a great question.
Right. I'm understanding equanimity, at least in this context, as being able to stand with what is, sort of to sit with what is, right? And I think oftentimes it's really interesting because we tend to have sort of different reactions to what is. So we all know the experience of the what is that we would like to change. Like, I don't like that. That's unpleasant. I would like it to be different. I want to change it, right? So that's the present that we're pushing away. Like, enough of this, right? But there's also a tendency to grab as well, right? So the tendency to say, oh, I like this so much. I don't know. I've certainly had the experience where there's something wonderful that happens, like a little over a year ago, right before the pandemic, my husband threw me a surprise party, and my mother and sister came into town for it, and I didn't expect to see them. And I was so excited and happy to see them that it took me a couple of hours before I realized that I was actually in agony. I was in agony because I was already upset about the fact that they were going to have to leave, right? So there I was, had this fantastic surprise opportunity to spend time with my mom and my sister. And I was already thinking, oi, how to make the best of this. I wasn't expecting this. So now, how do I squeeze every goodness out of this, right? So I think we tend to vacillate between those things. And then the neutral we tend to ignore, right? I don't know how many people found that when you found a neutral spot on your body, that it might have been like, oh, I forgot I had that body part. Like, oh, the tip of my nose. I forgot that there are nerves on the tip of my nose, right? And I think that's what he's talking about, that ability to be present, right? Which deepens our joy. So he also talks about this idea of simcha, right? This kind of exuberant joy. And how is that exuberant joy connected to a deep spirituality, right? So that it's not just kind of, I hope I don't offend anybody, but sort of party animal, frat boy mentality, like jumping from one high to another, right? How is it anchored in something deeply spiritual? And I think that's the connection he's making there.
Right, a more profound joy, and that makes me think of the language of, right, Ezehu Asher Sameach Bechelko, who is wealthy, one who is Sameach Simcha, somebody who is joyous within their portion, right? And so if we can just be, and whether that portion is time and the visit that happens upon you, or whatever it is, but to be able to be present with it, that there's an enormous opportunity there. And there's a question here about loving kindness, joy, equanimity, peace, shalom, or is it peace or shalom or yishuv hadat? These are great questions, and I think that, well, I'll leave it to you. You're the presenter here. So
so I don't have the chat on.
Sorry, so it's
not visible to me. So
it's just the most recent question here of what's the link? I think it's sort of asking what's the link between shalom, that sort of peace, and yishuv hadat, and this equanimity, or restful mind that we're speaking of now.
Right. That's really interesting. So the other thing, and I'm not really a Kabbalist, so I don't feel like I can speak to this very authoritatively, but Da'at is also, in some Kabbalistic understandings of the Sefirot, as sort of the place where everything is sort of, it's possible to sort of see things clearly, right? To be present with things clearly. And I don't know if that's connected with, I lost the comment because now there's too many comments.
Well, what's the relationship with peace, I guess, or
right? What's with the relationship with
right?
Peace?
Yeah, wholeness or completion also.
Right. Well, that whole right. So peace. So first of all, I do think that I want to think for a second. So if we look at peace as shalom, right? And as you mentioned, shalom has wholeness in it, right? Or completion. And I think that equanimity allows us to be whole in the sense that it allows us to be present with ourselves and our experience and with the world around us without having to cut some part of that out, without having some part of the experience or of our reality that we're trying to sort of cut out or remove or suppress, right? And I think that that's a lot of what completion is about, is being able to be with all of that, which is, I think all of us are also thinking about peace in the more geopolitical sense right now as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's got to be a connection there too, but that's probably too big for our discussion right now. But it could be a great topic.
We'll save it for another time. I think we can certainly say that the link between tikkun hanefesh, repair of ourselves, and tikkun olam, right, the repairing the world, that those two are inextricably linked, right, and that clearly work transformation of the self and transformation of the world towards both ends. The world is not going to be a peaceful place until the people who are in the world are at peace as well, right, and vice versa. So
there's some really great comments, and I'm having a little hard time reading them, partly because they're going by quickly, and partly because I apparently need glasses. So, it, right. That's really, so Michelle was saying that there's a balance between interiority and exteriority. And that's really interesting because this discussion, um, elsewhere in the Shem MiShmuel, he discusses this idea of Shabbat and Oneg being associated with the interior chambers
Mhm.
or the interior houses, and um, and Yom Tov and Simcha being associated with the external.
Mm.
So it does seem like he's trying to bring together some kind of unity, right, between that external and the interior as
Mhm.
well.
Mm.
And then Margaret said, equanimity is disposition and shalom is a state. Right. Interesting. Yeah. So is it, so I think then, right, the equanimity is that disposition that allows us to be in a state of shalom.
Mm.
Right?
More food for thought. All
Yeah.
right. Well, it's 15 after, and so I want to respect our time and just say thank you again, Heather, for a wonderful teaching today. Thank you to everybody for joining us today. And we will be back here tomorrow, same